I never imagined the biggest mistake of my life would begin with a contract that looked so ordinary. People assume you always know when you're about to fall in love. They think it starts with fireworks or some dramatic moment. It doesn't. Sometimes it starts with a signature, a paycheck, and a promise that neither of you will ever let things become personal. My name is Ethan. I was 23, broke, buried under student loans, and one missed rent payment away from sleeping in my car. Pride had already become a luxury I couldn't afford, so when my boss asked me to stay after work one Friday evening, I thought she was about to fire me. Instead, she quietly closed the glass door to her office. Claire Bennett had built the company from nothing. She was 46, confident without trying to be, and carried herself with the calm of someone who had survived enough disappointments to stop fearing new ones. She wasn't cold the way people whispered she was. She simply wasted very few words. She looked at me for several seconds before speaking. I have something unusual to ask. I forced a nervous smile. That doesn't sound reassuring. It won't. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a legal agreement. Marriage contract. For 1 year. I laughed because it had to be a joke. She didn't. There are family complications, she said evenly. An inheritance. A board of directors. I need a husband on paper. Nothing more. I stared at the pages, waiting for hidden cameras or someone to burst through the door laughing. Nothing happened. You'd be compensated generously, she continued. Enough to clear your debts and start over. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the number she mentioned. It was more money than I'd ever seen. I know how this sounds, she said. No. I whispered, still staring at the contract. Actually, I don't think I do. For the first time since I'd known her, Claire looked uncertain. It lasted only a heartbeat, but I caught it. I wouldn't ask, she said softly, if there were another way. That sentence stayed with me all night. Over the next 3 days I tried convincing myself to refuse. A fake marriage with my boss was insane. Complicated. Dangerous. But every unpaid bill on my kitchen counter argued against my pride. Monday morning, I walked back into her office. She didn't ask why I had returned. She already knew. Without a word, she handed me a pen. My fingers trembled as I signed my name. When I pushed the contract back across the desk, our hands touched for the briefest moment. Neither of us pulled away immediately. She lifted her eyes to mine, and something unreadable flickered across her face before she quietly said, "If we're doing this, there has to be one rule." I swallowed. What rule? She held my gaze just a second longer. We cannot fall in love. The words echoed in my head long after I left her office. We cannot fall in love, asterisk asterisk. If she hadn't said them, maybe I wouldn't have thought about it so much. The next few weeks became an exercise in pretending. Pretending the marriage certificate was just another legal document. Pretending the apartment we now shared for appearances was nothing more than a temporary arrangement. Pretending that every breakfast across the kitchen island didn't feel strangely, normal. Claire was careful. She kept everything professional, even at home. She left before I woke most mornings, returned late, answered emails during dinner, and thanked me whenever I cooked, as if we were polite strangers renting the same space. But every now and then, the walls she'd built around herself cracked. One rainy evening the power went out just as she walked through the front door. The apartment fell into darkness. "Don't move," I called. "I'll find the flashlight." "I know where the candles are," she answered. A few moments later, warm candlelight filled the living room, softening the sharp edges of the expensive furniture. Without the bright lights, the apartment felt less like the home of a powerful CEO and more like someone's quiet refuge. She slipped off her heels with a tired sigh. "Long day." She laughed under her breath. "I've had easier years." That wasn't the answer of my intimidating boss. It was the answer of a woman who hadn't slept properly in weeks. I made tea while she stood silently beside the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. "You don't have to work every minute," I said. "I know. But you do." She didn't deny it. After a long silence, she spoke so quietly I almost missed it. "My ex used to say I loved my company more than people." I looked at her. She kept watching the rain. I thought he was wrong. Another pause. Maybe he wasn't. There was no anger in her voice. Only exhaustion. I had never heard Claire Bennett sound unsure of herself before. "You built something incredible," I said carefully. She smiled without looking at me. "And somehow ended up eating dinner alone most nights." The room grew quiet again. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, the candles flickered between us. I noticed the tiny scar near her wrist as she reached for her mug. The loose strand of hair she'd stopped bothering to tuck behind her ear. The faint circles beneath her eyes that makeup couldn't completely hide. None of those things made her seem older. They made her seem real. And somehow, that felt far more dangerous. I kept reminding myself she was my boss. That this marriage had an expiration date. That she deserved someone with a settled life, not a 23-year-old who had signed a contract because he was desperate. Yet every day those reasons sounded weaker. As if sensing my thoughts, she turned toward me. "What?" she asked. I realized I'd been staring. "Nothing." A tiny smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "You're a terrible liar." Heat rushed to my face. She actually laughed, a soft, genuine laugh I had never heard in the office. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped closer. Not close enough to be inappropriate. Just close enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume mixed with rain. She looked down, hesitated, and gently rested her hand on my forearm. "I know this arrangement isn't easy for you," she said. "Thank you, for making it feel less lonely." My heartbeat stumbled. I wanted to tell her that she wasn't the only one whose life had changed. I wanted to tell her that somewhere between fake smiles for family photos and quiet dinners by candlelight, this marriage had stopped feeling fake. The words rose to my lips. Before I could say them, she looked into my eyes and asked softly, "Would you stay with me a little longer tonight?" I should have said no. Every sensible thought in my head told me to walk to my room, close the door, and remember why this marriage existed in the first place. Instead, I nodded. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'll stay." Claire let out the smallest breath, almost as if she'd been expecting me to refuse. She moved to the living room sofa, wrapping both hands around her mug while the rain tapped steadily against the windows. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt shared. "You know," she said after a while, her eyes fixed on the candle between us, "people think money solves loneliness." I looked at her. "They're wrong." There was no bitterness in her voice. Only acceptance. I spent years believing that if I worked hard enough, everything else would eventually fall into place. She smiled faintly. "Turns out success is terrible company." I didn't know what to say. So I told her the truth. When I was a kid, my mom worked 2 jobs. I used to pretend I was asleep when she'd get home because she always apologized for being late. Claire turned toward me. "Why?" I didn't want her to feel guilty. The word surprised even me. I hadn't talked about my mother in years. Claire's expression softened. "I'm sorry." I shrugged, trying to smile. "She's doing better now. But you still carry it." I blinked. She'd said it so simply. No judgment. No pity. Just recognition. For a second I forgot she was my boss. She was simply the first person who had looked at me and somehow noticed the weight I'd been pretending wasn't there. "I guess I do," I admitted. The room became quiet again. She reached toward the coffee table for her cup at the exact moment I did. Our fingers brushed. Neither of us moved. It wasn't dramatic. Just warm skin against warm skin. A simple accident that somehow felt impossible to ignore. Slowly, our eyes met. I could hear the rain. The ticking clock. My own heartbeat. She didn't pull her hand away immediately. Neither did I. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something. "So?" I whispered. "So?" She echoed, almost smiling. For one suspended moment, it felt as though every rule we'd written into that contract had quietly disappeared. Then her phone rang. The sound shattered the silence. Claire blinked, quickly withdrawing her hand before reaching for the phone. Her expression changed the instant she saw the screen. "It's my aunt," she murmured. She answered, forcing a calm tone. "Hi, Margaret." Even without hearing the other side, I could tell the conversation wasn't casual. Claire's shoulders stiffened. "Yes. He's here." A pause. "No, everything's fine." Another pause. Then she looked directly at me. "What? Tomorrow?" Her eyes widened just enough for me to notice. "I understand," she said quietly before ending the call. For several seconds she simply stared at the dark screen in her hand. "What happened?" I asked. She gave a tired laugh that carried no humor. My entire family decided they'd like to spend the weekend with us. All of them. She nodded. They want to see how happily married we are. Before I could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Neither of us was expecting anyone. Claire looked at the front door. Then at me. Very softly, almost under her breath, she said. I really hope that's not the beginning of everything falling apart. I walked toward the door, my hand closing around the handle, wondering whether opening it was about to change far more than our fake marriage. I opened the door expecting a delivery driver. Instead, a woman in her 60s stood there with 2 suitcases and a smile that disappeared the second she saw me. So, she said, looking me up and down, you're the husband. Before I could answer, Claire appeared beside me. Aunt Margaret. The older woman stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. She hugged Claire tightly, then looked around the apartment as if inspecting every corner. I decided to come a day early, she announced. The rest of the family will arrive tomorrow. Claire forced a smile. That's a surprise. I thought so. Her aunt's eyes lingered on the single coffee mug still sitting in front of my place on the couch and the second one in Claire's hands. You two were spending the evening together? Claire answered before I could. We were. Margaret nodded slowly, though something in her expression told me she wasn't completely convinced. For the next hour, Claire and I played our roles. We laughed at the right moments. Finished each other's sentences. Pretended our marriage had years of comfortable routines behind it instead of only a few nervous weeks. The strange part was that very little of it felt like acting anymore. When dinner ended, Margaret excused herself to the guest room. The apartment finally fell quiet again. Claire leaned against the kitchen counter and closed her eyes. I hate lying to her. You didn't have much choice. I know. She looked exhausted. Older than she'd seemed all evening. Without thinking, I stepped closer. You don't have to carry all of this alone. Her eyes lifted to mine. You keep saying things like that. What things? The kind that make this arrangement dangerous. I tried to laugh. It already was. She didn't smile. No. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It became dangerous when I started believing you. The words settled between us. Neither of us moved. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the rain that still hadn't stopped outside. I've been trying to keep my distance, I admitted. I noticed. I tell myself every morning that you're my boss. And every evening you become a little less like my boss. Claire looked away. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed frightened. Not of me. Of herself. I made that rule because I thought it would protect us, she said quietly. The one about not falling in love? She nodded. I've spent years making decisions with my head instead of my heart. I knew exactly how this was supposed to work. And now? A faint, broken smile crossed her face. Now I don't know anything. I took one slow step toward her. Close enough to see the uncertainty in her eyes. Close enough to notice that she wasn't stepping back. My hand lifted almost on its own. I brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. She closed her eyes for the briefest second, leaning ever so slightly into my touch before opening them again. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us looked away. The distance between us had become almost nothing. She searched my face as though trying to find one last reason to stop. Then, in a voice so soft it was almost lost in the silence, she asked, "If we forget the contract, if we forget the rules, tell me honestly." She held my gaze, waiting. "Would you still choose me?" The room fell completely silent. I opened my mouth to answer. And neither of us knew whether my next words would save us, or make turning back impossible. I didn't get the chance to answer. Before I could say anything, Claire's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Neither of us moved at first. It was almost as if we both knew that whatever was on that screen could pull us back into reality. Claire looked away from me and picked up the phone. Her expression changed instantly. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to disappointment. "What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just turned the screen toward me. It was a message from her lawyer. The family has requested a review of the marriage agreement. They believe the relationship may no longer be strictly contractual, ****. My stomach dropped. They know. Claire slowly shook her head. Not everything. The way she said it made me understand there was something she wasn't telling me. Claire. She placed the phone down. I should have told you something before we signed that contract. The room suddenly felt smaller. What? She walked toward the window, wrapping her arms around herself. When I first offered you this arrangement, it wasn't only because of the company. I waited. She took a long breath. My family wanted me to marry someone else. I frowned. What? Someone they chose. Someone who would make the board happy. Someone who looked perfect on paper. The anger in her voice surprised me. I refused. Then why me? That question had been sitting inside me since the day she handed me the contract. Claire stayed silent for a moment. Then she looked back at me. Because I trusted you. The answer should have made me feel better. Instead, it confused me more. Claire. She lowered her eyes. The first day you joined the company, you were the only person who didn't treat me differently after finding out who I was. I remembered that day. I had accidentally spilled coffee on an important report. I expected her to yell. She didn't. She simply helped me clean it. You were kind to me when you had nothing to gain, she continued. My chest tightened. But you could have hired anyone. I could have. A pause. I didn't want anyone. The honesty in her voice scared me more than the contract ever had. Before I could respond, another sound came from the hallway. A suitcase rolling across the floor. We both turned. Margaret stood there. Her expression was impossible to read. She had heard enough. I wondered when you two would stop pretending, she said quietly. Claire froze. Aunt Margaret. The older woman looked at me. Then at Claire. I knew this marriage started as an arrangement. My heart sank. But I didn't expect to see my niece look at someone the way she just looked at you. Claire's face changed. Please don't make this worse. Margaret sighed. I came here to expose a lie. She paused. But now I'm not sure which lie I'm talking about. The room went silent. Claire looked at me. I looked at her. And for the first time, I realized the biggest danger wasn't that our fake marriage would be discovered. It was that everyone else had already noticed something we were still afraid to admit. For the first time since I met Claire, I saw something I never expected. Fear. Not the fear of losing money. Not the fear of losing her reputation. The fear of losing something that had quietly become important. Margaret left us alone after a few uncomfortable minutes, saying she needed to give two stubborn people a chance to be honest. The door closed behind her. And suddenly, the apartment felt louder in its silence. Claire stood near the kitchen counter, staring at the contract folder sitting on the table. I should have told you everything from the beginning. I leaned against the chair. Maybe. She looked up. I know that isn't a small thing. No, it isn't. My answer was sharper than I intended. Her face changed slightly. And immediately, I regretted it. Not because she didn't deserve honesty. Because I knew what it felt like to be afraid of losing someone. I just don't understand, I admitted. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me? Claire looked down at her hands. Because everyone eventually wants something from me. The words came out quietly. Money. Connections. A position. A favor. She swallowed. When you needed help, you didn't ask for anything. You were just kind. I didn't know how to respond. She had built walls so high that even kindness looked suspicious to her. I wasn't looking for this either, I said. Her eyes lifted. This? I looked around the apartment. The contract. The fake photos. The life we were supposed to pretend. Then back at her. You. For a moment, she didn't move. I kept telling myself this was temporary, I continued. That when the year ended, I'd walk away with the money and we'd both go back to normal. A small, sad smile appeared on her face. That was the plan. Yeah. I paused. But I don't think there is a normal anymore. The silence after that felt different. Not empty. Honest. Claire walked toward the table and picked up the contract. The same contract that had started everything. Her fingers rested on the page where we had both signed our names. I thought this paper was protecting me. She looked at it for a long moment. But maybe it was just giving me an excuse not to admit what was happening. I stepped closer. What happens now? She looked at me. Really looked at me. I don't know. The answer was imperfect. And somehow, that made it real. I don't know how to suddenly become someone who isn't afraid, she whispered. I don't know how to suddenly stop caring what people think. A tear formed in her eyes, but she quickly wiped it away. The old Claire would have hidden it. This Claire didn't. I only know that when I imagined you leaving after this was over. She stopped. Her voice cracked slightly. It hurt more than I expected. My chest tightened. I reached for her hand. This time, she didn't hesitate. I don't want a contract, I said. I don't want a payment. She looked at our hands together. I want a choice. Claire squeezed my fingers gently. And for the first time since this strange arrangement began, neither of us was pretending. No cameras. No family. No rules. Just two people standing in the middle of a life neither of them planned. After a long silence, she whispered. Then choose me when there is nothing forcing you to. I smiled sadly. Claire. She looked at me. Because if you stay, she said softly, I need to know it's because you want to. I held her gaze. And this time, I didn't need a contract to tell me my answer. I used to think the hardest part of our arrangement would be convincing everyone else that our marriage was real. I was wrong. The hardest part was admitting that somewhere along the way, it had become real to us. A year ago, I walked into Claire Bennett's office because I needed money. I thought I was making a deal. A simple exchange. I would help her solve a problem, and she would help me solve mine. But life has a strange way of changing the meaning of things. The contract that brought us together eventually became the least important thing between us. The family meetings, the rumors, the pressure from the company board, all of it eventually faded because there was something stronger than appearances. Trust. It didn't happen overnight. There were still difficult days. Days when Claire questioned whether she was too broken to let someone close. Days when I wondered if I was just a temporary chapter in a life that was much bigger than mine. We argued. We misunderstood each other. We almost walked away more than once. But every time, we came back and chose honesty instead of pretending. 6 months after the contract ended, Claire asked me something I never expected. She asked if I wanted to stay even though I didn't have to. No money. No agreement. No reason except her. And that was the moment I realized something. Love isn't always the person who arrives when everything is perfect. Sometimes it's the person who sees your flaws, your fears, your unfinished parts. And stays anyway. Claire was still the woman who built a successful company from nothing. She was still confident, stubborn, and impossible to convince when she had made up her mind. But now I also knew the woman behind all of that. The woman who laughed when she forgot where she'd put her glasses. The woman who secretly hated thunderstorms but pretended she didn't. The woman who needed someone to remind her that she was more than her achievements. And she knew me too. Not the struggling employee who signed a contract. Not the young man who needed saving. Just me. Looking back, I don't regret the decision that brought us together. I don't even regret the fear that came with it. Because sometimes the things we enter for the wrong reasons can lead us somewhere we never expected. Our story didn't begin with love. It began with desperation, uncertainty, and two people trying to fix their own problems. But somewhere between fake smiles, quiet conversations, and moments neither of us planned, we found something real. And maybe that's the part nobody tells you. The most unexpected connections are often the ones that change you the most. So, did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?